All right. We've talked a lot about Geno Smith. He's been, I think, the lead topic of every podcast we've done for a while. We've been speculating about his trade probability, whether he would start, whether the Seahawks would cut him, etc. We saw them pick up not only his his we saw them pick up that's good pod, by the way.
That's great.
We saw them pick up his injury guarantee, and then we recently saw them convert his roster bonus into a signing bonus. So I said last week that the deadline last week was basically the deadline. They were not going to release him. Now they're almost certainly not going to trade him because of the way this is set up. The cap situation would be worse if they traded him. And the only reason you were trying to get rid of Geno Smith, from my perspective, is not like just performance-based, but it was cap-based. It was cap-related. Now I think the way they've done this, where they've pushed the dead cap hit into 2025, half of it, I think that it's more likely that he's actually going to be the quarterback in 2025 also than it was. So I think for me, the Geno Smith debate is put to bed for 2024. He should go into training camp and OTAs as the presumptive starter for all fans. Obviously, the Seahawks have made bold moves when they've signed quarterbacks or devoted a bunch of money to quarterbacks in the past, but I think that should be where we're at. And I think that unless a team has like a mid-season injury, an Rodgers, a Kirk Cousins, something like that next year, that kind of situation, and Geno Smith suddenly has this premium value, you got to expect that he's going to play through 2024 with the Seahawks.
Seahawks never make any sense. Like, everything they do just contradicts what people think they're going to do. You know, from the draft to their signings to their trades. It's like most of the time what they do just doesn't make sense on the surface. And then once you kind of dig into whatever they've done, it starts to make sense. But, you know, we never are able to project what they're going to do. The thing that the Seahawks are doing right now that is very confusing is this week obviously is the Combine, which really is just an opportunity for a lot of NFL execs to speak to the media during the offseason, which, you know, once the season kind of gets done, you don't really get a chance to talk to these guys very often. So you're getting an opportunity to talk to John Schneider, hear from him, and he's speaking in very, I would say, coded language about both Drew Lock and Geno Smith.
Sure.
In a way that seems to insinuate the organization is pretty high on Drew Lock, which is weird because he's a free agent, right? So it's like he's not even under contract with them, but they're still speaking very positively about him. And kind of negatively, not negatively about Geno Smith, but very just like
it's qualified.
It's not as much praise as they're giving to a guy who's technically not even going to be on their team here unless they somehow work out a contract soon.
Sure.
So it is interesting because everything that they're doing on paper seems to, you know, it seems to hint at Geno Smith being the starter for the Seahawks next year and possibly beyond, as you mentioned. But everything that they're saying publicly almost seems to hint at that's not what they want to do. So it's just it's a weird thing. I know we have, you know, they kind of changed up the contract a little bit to make it more palatable for all parties, I guess. But I just don't know. I think you're right. I think it makes sense on paper for them to go in with Geno Smith as a starter. We talked about this last week, how we understand, like, whether you agree with the decision or not, I think anyone can understand why they would go that route. Any objective person could look at that and say it makes sense. But the way that they keep talking about Drew Lock, the fact that they have a new coaching staff in place, the fact that the draft is coming up and they could conceivably go after a quarterback at some point if they wanted to, just makes it really interesting. I think there's kind of been like this thought all season and into the offseason long that the Seahawks would draft a quarterback this year because it's a strong quarterback class and they don't really have what most people see as a franchise QB. But the closer we get to the draft, the more they talk about some of these other guys, it doesn't seem like they're going to go that route. I don't know. It just maybe they would spend a higher draft pick on a quarterback, but they certainly don't have to.
Sure.
And it seems like maybe they're going to go away from that altogether. So
I have a hypothesis, which hypothesizing about what the Seahawks are going to do is it's an exercise in futility. We all know that, but there was a lot of talk about them being interested in Anthony Richardson last year at 5, and he obviously goes 4 to the Indianapolis Colts. And my thought on that was and I think there's guys available in later rounds that you could do this with, by the way. if they drafted Anthony Richardson, they could have gotten value in packages, in scenarios out of Anthony Richardson last year without him being required to take 65 snaps a game. You know what I mean? He could come in, he could learn the offense throughout the week, he could take reps during practice, but he could also come in and make a difference, make big plays on the field on game day. And I think there's guys like that, and I think Jordan Travis is a guy who's going to miss. It looks like he's going to miss most of 2024 after breaking his leg, and he's a guy that makes sense to me as like a later round guy. And with Geno Smith and Drew Lock on the roster, Joe Milton's a guy that I like, just rocket arm, great athlete, quarterback out of Tennessee, who I think could fit a similar mold. He's not the same kind of athlete as, by the way, we're into my fucking season. I don't know if that's obvious. I love the NFL draft more than almost anything, and I'm obsessed with these, like how to get some like quality quarterbacks at a low price. Obviously, it's something we've talked about the whole offseason. And now, so I think there's an option for something like that if they keep both those guys. And I think that to do that effectively, you really need to carry three quarterbacks, because we saw the Seahawks never get anything out of Seneca Wallace. Do you remember that stretch of time where everybody was talking about, there's like a package for him, but they never wanted him to get injured mid-game, and then if you're out of quarterback, you couldn't put him in for packages because he was your backup. But if he's your third-string quarterback, he's your Taysom Hill in basically the Taysom Hill role. I think could be what the Seahawks use a young quarterback for in 2024. Not catching passes. I mean, like.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying. I think it's you don't see it very often in the NFL. You'd see it in college for sure. You see it with unique specimens like Taysom Hill. You don't often see it with a young quarterback that the team has invested draft capital in, because the risk level is just too high. And also, it's kind of a tough sell on a quarterback. You know, if you are a quarterback, that's the position you want to play. To come in and be the gadget guy is
but when you're a fifth-round quarterback, it's a little different.
I mean, yeah, like there's been guys in the recent past that have done that. Joe Webb was a quarterback from Minnesota who kind of converted entirely at some point to another position. But, I guess if you look at it as this is my only way to play in the NFL, then absolutely you're going to do it. But if you have a chance to actually be a QB, then why would you stray from that path? So while I understand what you're saying, I think the more likely scenario that you kind of hinted at that I could certainly see them do is continue to employ Geno Smith and Drew Lock, draft a later round quarterback like a Jordan Travis that you mentioned, rather than, a first or second round pick, as many fans have speculated over the past few months. But you draft that later round quarterback and you almost get a chance to redshirt him in a way. Like you
Can I real quickly before we get, because we're going to go away from this a little bit, I want to tell you one quarterback who got in his first game, not a starter at quarterback, ran the ball 7 times for 39 yards. 2 rushes his second game, no rushes his third game, 4 rushes his fourth game. I think you might get where this is going. Through 9 games, he had several carries. Didn't throw the ball a ton, had more carries than pass attempts. Guy who was adamant about playing quarterback, Lamar Jackson, in his first year in Baltimore.
Lamar Jackson, yeah.
Yeah, that was a role that he played.
Oh, Flacco.
Yeah, it was late Flacco. Late stage Flacco, which we didn't know was mid stage Flacco at the time.
Early stage. I think that's a good comparison or a good example, I should say.
Sure.
But
he was also a first round pick, which goes against what I said. I think if you get a guy like a Joe Milton or somebody that's a 5th round pick and can see the field in his first year, that's a great opportunity for a 5th round quarterback.
I think the difference is in the perception. I mean, if you look at Baltimore at that time when they drafted Lamar, they knew they were kind of coming to the end of the line with Joe Flacco because his performance was declining. But he was still a Super Bowl winning quarterback. Obviously, it's kind of a punchline now, but you had all the discussions about whether Joe Flacco was elite. Regardless of where you fell in that camp, this dude had won a Super Bowl and had proven he was one of the better quarterbacks in the league. Now, the perception, we've talked about this a lot, but the perception of Geno Smith and Drew Lock is that they're not even to the level that Joe Flacco was at that point in time with Baltimore, right? So the perception among people outside the Seahawks organization is like, why would you stick with either of these guys when they're not great, when they're
Sure.
average at best. But as we've discussed, I mean, I think the Seahawks' perception of both Geno Smith and Drew Lock is much higher than anyone else's. And
Yeah, I agree.
whether they're right or wrong about that remains to be seen if they keep continuing this trend. But because their internal perception of these guys is so high, I just don't see them investing a lot of capital in a new QB. We can play this back when they go and spend their first round pick on Michael Penix or something like that.
Of course. Well, we had an embarrassing one last year, if you recall. I said there was no way they're drafting Devin Witherspoon. There's no way they're drafting a receiver. And then they, with their first 2 picks, they picked Devin Witherspoon and a receiver. Yeah.
It's almost like they heard you. I guess the one thing we know about the Seahawks is if anyone is very adamant that they are or are not going to do something, it's just going to blow up in your face because they always just zig when everyone else is zagging.
Yep. Mark Harris says Casa Grande is cheap, LOL, which I assume is a city in Arizona. And please give me a house for free then, Mark Harris. What are you doing? Quit. How much are you committed to loving this podcast? And then our pal Bob Springer said, how much does that second round pick we traded for Leonard Williams hurt? At the time, I liked the trade, but now not so much. Do we reach at 16? Trade up? And I'll say that this is what I remember hearing at the time, because a second round pick seemed pretty steep to me, and especially when you paired it with, like, I think it was a third round pick for Chase Young, and Montez Sweat I think was a third round pick, and obviously those guys play a different position and fill a different role, but if Leonard Williams signs for a big deal, there was a lot of thought that the Seahawks would recoup a third round compensatory pick next year. So it's like trading a second round this year for a third round next year, which by the way, it's a little bit of a pick swap, but I don't love it, but I would like to have a second round pick this year if I was them. I have a little bit of a suspicion, by the way, that they will end up with a second round pick. I think they're going to trade back. I think that also there's going to be, it seems like 4 quarterbacks are going to go in the first 12, so I don't necessarily want to see them there at 16 taking the 5th or 6th best quarterback. Potentially, I like Michael Penix a lot. It's starting to seem a lot more, and I don't love this as a Michael Penix fan, but it's starting to seem a lot more like he's going to be available in the second round. And so if they could trade, like, I think the Giants might make a lot of sense as a partner. They have 2 second round picks. There's a bunch. I spend like now my like moments of zen are just doing these fucking Pro Football Focus and Pro Football Network mock drafts, which I post on Twitter every now and then. The one out of every 1,000.
You should incorporate that into your comedy act somehow, because it is
the most boring topic. Nobody cares about mock drafts like me and Bob Springer, I think.
You love mock drafts, man. No, I think these midseason trades, the thing that we've learned about the Seahawks is they don't care if those trades for veterans midseason blow up in their face. They just don't care. They don't. Like, I mean, and I wouldn't say the Leonard Williams trade blew up in their face because he was fine. But, like, the risk involved is, like,
sure,
you're trading for a guy to make you better this year, knowing that how realistic is your shot at winning a Super Bowl this year? They just have struggled to capitalize off those midseason trades when they make them. They're certainly working to fill holes on their existing roster. But if they could have just addressed those holes in the offseason, then you don't have to give up this draft collateral in the middle of the year. And I would say they're always going to go for it. Just based on what we know about the Seahawks, they're always going to go for it, even if it seems like their chances of winning are not great. But it would be nice if they could finally hit on one of these, instead of having to look back at the end of every year and say, boy, I wish we hadn't given up that pick.
Yeah, and that's what I'll say I respect about the Pete Carroll era, the end of the Pete Carroll era and the John Schneider era, is even though I actually will say I was pretty optimistic about Jamal Williams when that trade happened. I was wrong, obviously. I've been pretty happy. Jamal Adams. Did I say Jamal Williams? Jesus. I had a high school
throwback.
I know, and I had a high school friend that passed away named Jamal. Shout out to Jamal Williams. And his brother Terrence. That's not good. Anyways, I should remember his brother's name. But anyway, I liked that they knew where they were on the win curve. They knew where they were on the, I think Pete Carroll and John Schneider knew that the window to some degree is closing. And so take a shot in 2023. I'm fine with that. I'm fine with. It's also the way they've done it, which is different from like the way New Orleans did it and some other teams and New England did it for stretches. They didn't put the team in cap hell for a half decade. They're a somewhat neutral cap situation. I'm like I don't feel, and also hopefully Leonard Williams comes back to Seattle and it's not like, and then they just have Leonard Williams because he seems like a guy that fits that defense pretty well, and if you can keep him on a reasonable contract, that's good.